Days from now, the UK will decide whether to remain in or leave the EU. Both sides have been slugging it out on the campaign trail. But many voters complain that when it comes to understanding the issues, they're confused by what they're being told.
There's a lot of ifs going on.
Bickering back and forth.
A lot of confusion.
It's too much for people to take in.
Nobody has the answers.
I'm very conscious of being sold fairy dust.
People want leadership. People want vision.
This programme makes you a promise. You won't be hearing from any politicians.
To be honest, I don't expect too much of politicians.
It's completely made up.
They drive me up the wall as well.
Alleged facts that have been bandied about.
We never know the true facts. We only know what they want us to know.
Instead, you'll hear from people from all across the UK, voters from both sides of the debate.
We don't know what's going to happen if we leave.
We can survive perfectly well outside the EU.
As for me, I'll be trying to cut through the confusion and provide at least some of the answers. I'll be challenging claims made by both sides on the biggest issues, the economy, immigration and sovereignty. And I'll be providing you with the facts, telling you what are not facts, and also what judgments only you can make.
And then we'll see if that makes any difference to what our voters think.
I absolutely believe that we should have our sovereignty back.
There will be jobs lost because of leaving.
I don't know.
It's not going to move me.
Will we be richer or poorer? That's the question many will ask before voting on Thursday. Should we stay in the world's largest economic club or break free from a continent that's stagnating and a bureaucracy that's holding us back? Let's examine some of the rival claims. Count the number of cranes. That's one way to tell how well an economy is doing. And in recent years, ours has been doing pretty well. The key argument of those who want us to remain in the EU is that leaving will take us on a journey which will leave us all poorer. Their most eye-catching and controversial claim is that every family in Britain would be £4,300 a year worse off by 2030. The claim that families would be £4,300 a year worse off if we left the EU is not a fact. It is based on an economic forecast by Treasury officials, but it's been spun in a way to look as bad as possible and in a way which a committee of MPs of all parties said was likely to confuse and mislead voters. What is a fact is that economic forecasters, wherever they are pretty much agreed that leaving the EU will make us all worse off. People might say you economic forecasters have often got things wrong in the past, and you may well be wrong again.
You've just got everyone saying this. There is virtually no disagreement within the economics profession about this. In the short run, uncertainty would grow. We'd have less foreign direct investment coming in. The pound would go down. People would consume less. The economy would suffer.
Few doubt there will be a short-term hit to our economy if we leave. But those who want us to get out argue that Europe's stuck in the past, that Britain can benefit if we break free and do more business with the rest of the world. So says the man who used to head up the country's biggest business organisation.
I don't actually believe that leaving the EU will be a serious economic blow. Britain owned the 19th century, America owned the 20th, Asia owns the 21st. And you have a Brussels, in all its policies, marching valiantly towards 1970. And we need to keep being globally competitive so that we can afford quality pensions, quality healthcare, quality welfare for our grandchildren. To do that, we need to make decisions which make us competitive, and Brussels isn't doing it.
So the judgment you need to make is this. Are all those forecasters wrong? Are they being too pessimistic about what the fifth largest economy in the world could achieve on its own? After all, they didn't see the banking crisis coming, did they? Or do you conclude that if so many experts agree on the same thing, that Britain would be poorer if we left, it is just possible they could be right? The EU is the world's biggest free market area. As a member, we in Britain can sell our goods and services
to more than 500 million people in what's called the single market, comprised of 28 countries, without having to pay tariffs or taxes at national borders. The Remain camp say 3 million British jobs are linked to being inside that single market. Jobs, they say, which would be at risk if we had to negotiate a new trade deal because we'd quit.
The fact is, no one really believes that we'll lose 3 million jobs if we leave the EU. After all, say the leavers, the French will still want to sell us their cheese, the Germans will still want to sell us cars. But reaching a new deal with the EU over trade could be tricky. It took the Canadians 7 years to negotiate one. And what's more, the things that Britain really makes money from, services like insurance and marketing and banking, they could be the hardest things to get agreement over.
There is no trade agreement between any other country in the European Union which gives any country anything like the access that you get being inside. We'll get a deal at some point, but it won't be as good as the deal we have at the moment, and that will make that trade more expensive.
I think the trade prospects of the United Kingdom outside the EU will be very much the same as they are inside the EU. I don't see a change, simply because it's in no one's interests in a globalised economy to do otherwise.
Thank you. The judgment you've got to make is this. If we leave the EU, if we walk out of the single market, is it bound to be harder for us to trade our goods and services? Are we bound to lose jobs? Or is that view simply too pessimistic? Whatever the deal we get with the EU in future, could we be freer to get new deals with the growing economies like China and India?
But hold on, there's something else to consider. Don't we pay an awful lot of money to be members of this European club?
The claim from the Vote Leave campaign is that we send to Brussels £350 million each and every week. There's only one problem with the claim. It's not true. Britain doesn't send £350 million a week to Brussels. Mrs. Thatcher got us a rebate, so that takes the figure down to £276 million a week. And it doesn't end there. If you then take off all the money that we get given back from Brussels, the figure goes down again to £161 million. The amount we send to Brussels each week may be a lot less than Vote Leave sometimes want to claim, but it's still an awful lot of money, adding up to £8 billion a year. Now, of course, if all those economic forecasters are right, any savings that you make by leaving the EU could be instantly wiped out simply because the economy gets smaller. So that is the judgment you need to make in the end. Is it a membership fee for a club that makes us all richer, or is it money that is simply going down the drain?
So having watched our reality check on all those claims about the economy, what do our voters think now?
We're still paying a lot to be in a membership club. It's a club membership. We don't need to be in that membership. We've got a lot going that we don't need to be using an outsider to make decisions.
I know the Leave people say, oh, if we don't spend all this money on Europe, we can fix the NHS. And I just don't believe them for a second.
All those economic forecasters can't be wrong. It's very unlikely that that many people are going to be wrong, and it's clear that the economic community is united on this issue, that it will put a hit to the economy and to households and families.
It seems like the economy will be hit more than I thought if we leave. But, you know, it wasn't definite facts, was it? It was maybes.
Leaving a bigger economy, a bigger market where we can sell our goods and services to, I think it's immediately we are kind of shooting ourselves in the foot.
Maybe we will lose jobs, but hell, I think the risk is worth it if it gives us our rights, our land and prospects back, which is probably what will happen if we leave.
It's a dreadful risk, I think, to leave the EU when there are so many uncertainties, but especially when the uncertainties seem to point in the direction of our economy being damaged.
No company in Germany, France, Belgium, Holland are going to pull the rug under companies in England who are buying goods off each other. It doesn't, like every other argument, it just doesn't make sense.
Now, immigration is the other big issue dominating this campaign. One side tells us we've got to leave to bring it under control. The other claims that the country can cope, and besides, quitting is too high a price to pay. So let's try and sift out the facts from the claims and counterclaims.
London is sometimes called the capital of the world, a city where you can even get a Turkish shave. Watch out, say the Leave campaign, many more Turks are coming. The Vote Leave campaign poster couldn't be clearer. Turkey is joining the EU, it says. The implication, totally clear. Millions of Turks are coming here, and soon. That, say those who campaign to limit the numbers coming here, is a prospect well worth getting in a lather about.
The UK has been championing Turkey's membership for many years. We're now told that the whole process is going to be re-energised.
That is a judgment, it is not a fact.
On the basis of what has been said and done, Turkey will become a member of the European Union at some point.
There's a problem with this claim. Turkey is not joining the EU. It might do one day, providing, that is, that Britain and indeed the 27 other members of the EU don't veto it. The Prime Minister says Turkey won't be joining for decades, but he isn't promising to veto them. So you have to decide if you think Turkey will be blocked, or if one day, like the Poles, they'll join up and their people will come here in large numbers. Those who want us to vote Remain insist that the NHS can cope even if more and more people do come here from within the EU. They quote the head of the NHS in England, who recently said that what really mattered was not the level of immigration. What mattered to him trying to run the health service was how rich the country was.
When the NHS was set up in 1948, we had a population of 50 million in this country. We're at, what, 65 million now. So the NHS has perfectly successfully coped with a 15 million expansion in our population. Provided it is properly resourced from the proceeds of economic growth, it can do that.
But hold on, our population is growing at a much faster rate than it has for decades. The official forecast suggests there'll be another 4 million of us in just 10 years' time.
This health service cannot cope in the future. You know why? Because it can't cope now. That's what we're hearing all the time. The health service is under huge pressure, requires more resources. Just imagine how much more by way of resources is going to require with our population increasing at the rate that it is.
Of course, immigrants aren't just people who use the NHS. They help pay for it out of their taxes, and they work in it too. Here's a fact: 1 in every 11 hospital doctors came from the EU. So do 1 in 17 nurses and care workers. It's true that in theory the NHS can cope with a big influx of people, providing it gets more staff and more money, of course. But equally, that doesn't mean that immigration doesn't put a strain on the health service, and a particular strain in areas where there's a rapid inflow of people. Go for a coffee in many cities, it's a fair bet you'll be served by an immigrant. This cafe is run by French people, amongst the 2 million EU citizens currently working in Britain. Both sides in this referendum insist that they're committed to cutting immigration, to get net migration down below the government target of 100,000 a year. Though the Leave campaign claim this will be much easier to achieve if we're outside the EU. The fact is that even if we leave the EU, even if we could switch off immigration from there, just like that,
the government would be nowhere near meeting its net migration target. Why? Because the latest figures show there are more people coming here from outside Europe than inside Europe. Indeed, just on their own, they're almost double that target.
Most big British employers say they rely on immigrants. If they couldn't get them from Europe, they'd want to get them from other parts of the world.
There are not enough British workers to fulfil the needs of business. And business needs global skills and experience, and they need migrants to help them grow their companies.
In simple terms, are you saying that if we don't employ Poles or Romanians or Spaniards, we will still end up needing someone to man the care homes and the hospitals and to drive the buses?
Yes.
Both sides in this referendum are telling you what they think you want to hear, that they can get migration down to that government target figure. But neither are spelling out how they do it, given that businesses insist that they do need immigrants, whether from Europe or from outside, to do the sort of jobs that Brits don't want to do or are not qualified to do. It is a fact that leaving the EU would make getting migration under control easier, but it's a judgment you have to make as to whether politicians would actually do it, and if they did, whether the country would pay an economic price.
So let's see what our voters think about immigration now.
I believe that the NHS can cope. I work as a nurse. I see it all the time. And I work with many Europeans from Spain, Spanish nurses, Italians, Romanians, and they're brilliant.
I have worked in the NHS, and I know it cannot cope. I know firsthand. So I don't need that video. I don't need that researcher. I know firsthand. It's just too much on the NHS.
I think it's incredibly powerful that each European member state has a veto, and this does apply to Turkey joining. OK, at a late stage in the process, it might cause some diplomatic ripples, but we have that safeguard.
Yeah, we definitely, 100% will be able to control immigration a lot easier if we leave the EU. You know, if you're in the EU, you have to agree to the free movement of people, so instantly right there, you're relinquishing your right to control people coming into your country, so by leaving, it's obvious, isn't it?
I don't see immigration being a problem. I don't think the EU and the way that they're suggesting that we deal with immigration is impacting on us as a country.
The last part of this video has now shown that by leaving we could, you know, there'll be a negative impact on our economy, but it'll also be a negative impact on our social structure as well. So that's where I was weighing up, and that video has sort of brought in different dimensions or different angles to that argument, which is now telling me that perhaps if we do leave, then those benefits that I was thinking that may be there may not be there.
We need migrant workers to fill the skills gap as well as the employment gap that's left because British people might not have the skills to do those jobs.
The last time I checked, there's a huge amount of unemployed people. I mean, try telling that to the thousands of young unemployed people in the northeast and they'd tell you that's a complete joke.
Let's turn now to sovereignty. Who really runs Britain? Does being in the European club mean our lives are run by, our laws are made in Brussels? You've heard the claims, you've heard the counterclaims. Time now for some facts. Those who want us to leave the EU say there's a not-so-hidden agenda to create a United States of Europe, a kind of country with its own flag and passport, with its own court and currency, with plans for common tax and spending policies, and one day, who knows, a European army as well.
And that has got some of our former military top brass demanding we put our foot down.
For me, sovereignty is about being directly accountable to the will of the people here in this nation. And I think that we'll have more democracy, more sovereignty by not allowing ourselves to be pulled further and further into the European, to me, undemocratic system.
But you don't simply get it back by leaving the EU.
I don't think you ever become completely sovereign, independent of everything that's going on around you in the world. This is not about pulling up drawbridges and pretending we've got full control. We'll never have full control.
It is true that plans are being drawn up for the EU to have greater power over tax and spending, to try to prevent another Eurozone crisis, and over borders to deal with the migration crisis. But Britain might not have to be part of any of them. We are, of course, not part of the single currency. We're also not part of that Schengen borderless area, and we have a national veto over any decisions about foreign and defence policy. So you have to decide whether we can get off pretty much whenever we want, wherever the EU is going. Now, what really bugs some people about the EU is the idea that Brussels bureaucrats can tell us what to do.
Here is regulated EU man waking from his regulated slumber to start his regulated day.
This anti-EU film jokes about just how many rules we face from the minute we wake up.
There are 1,246 laws relating to bread, but just 52 covering the crazy anarchic toaster.
There are 625 laws covering coffee, they say, and a staggering 210 covering spoons, and what's more, apparently more than 12,000 covering milk. In fact, those who want us to leave the EU claim that more than half of our laws come from Brussels. Now, the truth depends on what you call a law. Do you include every rule and every regulation? If you don't, experts say the number's a lot lower, could be around 1 in 8. The numbers aren't helping us a lot, though, are they? The man who used to be Britain's top civil servant says how much power Brussels has depends on which laws you're talking about.
In some areas, for example, making sure that goods can be sold across all the countries, yes, we need a level playing field, and in those areas, laws to do that do come virtually entirely from the European Union. In other areas like crime, defence, education, virtually nothing comes from Europe.
But is it right that we have to have not just dozens but hundreds of regulations about milk?
I think we'd all agree that we'd like to ensure that the milk we drink is safe. Therefore, we need a certain number of regulations on that. So I think there's safety, there's environmental concerns, and it's quite important in an area where everyone's competing in this world that it's a level playing field, that we're all operating by the same set of rules.
So what businesses may see as irritating red tape, others may see as vital protection of health and safety, or even workers' rights. Now, if we did leave, we wouldn't be able to leave EU laws completely behind. Companies that wanted to trade with our EU neighbours would still have to comply with all the rules that Brussels comes up with, though crucially, those that didn't would no longer have to. The thing you have to decide is whether it's all the rules that really annoy you, or whether it's the fact that you can't vote out some of the people who make them. That is what matters, say leavers. Who makes and who enforces our laws? People here or people somewhere else? That is the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom. But people who want us to leave the EU say the problem is it isn't really supreme. It can be told what to do by the European Court in Luxembourg. Parliament can be told what to do. We can be told what to do. And not just about the sort of rules that govern toasters or the trade in bananas, but about really important things like our own national security. Remember Abu Hamza, who was convicted of terrorism? His Moroccan daughter-in-law was jailed here for trying to smuggle a SIM card to him in prison. When Britain tried to deport her, the European Court of Justice became involved. The Leave campaign complained that the court could stop Britain deporting her because she has a son who's a British citizen. That's true, but it's also true that in this case, the British courts get the final say. She can be deported if they decide she's a threat to national security.
So here's where you have to make a judgment. If you loathe the idea of the European Court having any say on this at all, you might think you've got to vote to leave. But if you think that all sorts of courts make all sorts of judgments, some you like and some you hate, you might think you can afford to remain.
With those sovereignty claims checked for reality, what do our voters think now?
I would be concerned if we were going to be dragged along a road of deeper and deeper integration. And it was really interesting to see in the film that, that we do, in fact, have a veto.
My vote stands for being in Britain, the United Kingdom, as an independent country, making its own laws and ruling its own people in the way that we want, not what foreign powers want.
Red tape made in Britain. Well, at least we're running our own affairs. At least it's our affair, and it's something we can look after ourselves without having to go to Brussels and the European Court to sort things out. We can sort things out here in Britain.
People just have an aversion to regulation in general. What is wrong with rules? We live by rules every day of our lives, and actually that's for me a sign of a progressive society, to be able to say this is the way we want to live, these are the rules that we have to follow for the good of everyone.
I wasn't aware that we can ultimately overrule European law on the basis if it's a national terror threat. But aside from that, I think that our own legal system is quite capable of observing laws that it thinks make sense from other countries.
Britain does have a say on what happens within the country, and if they want to deport somebody, they can. It might cause a big hoo-ha somewhere, but if they want to deport somebody, they are able to do it if they've got the right reasons to do it.
No, I still believe that the end game of the European Union, well, France and Germany really, because they're the ones with the reins, is a superstate.
I don't see it as a United States of Europe, or one where we can have one flag waving and everyone's going to be there singing a new European Union anthem type thing. I believe it's more of just a collective of countries. It's not going to be from one massive state.
Voters have been crying out for facts in this referendum, and perhaps the biggest of all is this. No politician, no expert, no commentator can predict the future in or out of the EU with any certainty. So in the end, it comes down to your judgment, perhaps how you feel in your gut. One thing is clear, though, this is one of the biggest political decisions any of us will take in our lifetimes.
I feel that we would be better being our own boss, in charge of our own destiny.
If we leave now, it's potentially disastrous.
I want British laws, and I'm going to bloody well stay like it.
I will feel proud and hopefully thankful once the result comes out that we have remained within the EU.
I feel like this is a really important decision for me to make because, you know, it's going to affect a lot of my choices in the future and now.
I think it's important that we utilise our vote to make our future better, basically. And that's what I think my vote's about.